to join as well for the discussion following. Dr. Sutherland has authored a wonderful book on hospitality. He's been doing some further reflection on hospitality in light of our current corona crisis. He and Rabbi Cardin co-taught the Jewish Christian Studies course 2 years ago with a focus on hospitality, a great course from everything the students said to us about that. So Dr. Sutherland is going to present now, What Shall I Do with My Time? Thinking about hospitality in the time of coronavirus. And after his presentation, we'll begin a discussion and invite questions in the chat feature that we'll curate and draw into the conversation. Dr. Sutherland.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to
afternoon.
thank you for all of you for joining this town hall meeting today, and to thank Dean Latham for the invitation to share with you, and Dr. Hancock for making all this happen. And I'm especially pleased that I'm joined by my good friend and colleague Rabbi Nina Cardin. These are indeed extraordinary times. Well, let me be careful here. These are extraordinary times for some people, but not for everyone. Let me explain. Like yourself, my life and world has been interrupted. My routines, my abilities, my desires are out of sync with what it means to shelter in place, social distancing, quarantine. The COVID-19 virus has affected the language we use and the metaphors we use to describe our situation. Now, very often I hear people talking about feeling imprisoned or going stir crazy, that they're locked in their house and they can't get out. This is the language of incarceration. But listen to how an actual prisoner, the Apostle Paul, described his life. Not that I am speaking of being in need, for I have learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. Now, I want you to notice that there's no hint from this prisoner of self-pity in his remarks. There's no sense that his imprisonment was going to overturn other ways of viewing his life. In fact, he seems to have found a way to become in sync with his time. I read an article recently by Jerry Metcalf, a man incarcerated in Michigan and who writes for the Marshall Project, a nonpartisan, nonprofit news organization that seeks to create and sustain a sense of national urgency about the US criminal justice system. In the article he wrote, entitled, "No, your coronavirus quarantine is not just like being in prison," he says in part, "For those of you who are reading this who feel entrapped or are going stir crazy due to your coronavirus-induced confinement, the best advice I can give you, as someone used to suffering long-term confinement, is to take a pause, inhale a few deep breaths, and then look around at all the things you have to be grateful for. That's what I've done each and every day for the past 25 years. Every morning when I wake in my 8 by 10 foot cell, I peer out my small window and thank the universe for such a view. It's not much, mostly razor wire and uniform-clad convicts. But out past all those layers of fencing rest the few acres of deep forest teeming with life. I found that during trying times like these, the simplest things matter the most. Sure, you're trapped inside your home or apartment, but all's not lost. Hopefully you have family, friends, or loved ones with you, or maybe a trusted pet. If not, you've got Wi-Fi. You've also have your own bathroom and kitchen, which I hope, given your access to the world of commercial sanitizing products, are corona-free. I have none of these spaces. I share a bathroom with 96 other convicts. In my cell, I have a narrow, lumpy mattress and a middle school-sized desk that I cram myself into while writing. as I am now as I type this. Look around the room you're in. What do you see? I bet all kinds of welcoming things that speak of safety and comfort, things like a favorite chair or painting, or maybe some family heirloom that's been passed down from an elderly loved one. Take comfort in these things. They are important, I know, because as the years drag on for me here behind bars, those were the things that I pine for the most. The things I most look forward to seeing when I finally go home, whatever the world may be like when I get there. And for some reason, if you still find yourself going stir crazy after all the deep breaths and the journey inwards, then try more straightforwardly considering my situation. I'd give anything to trade places with you right now. Look around the room. What do you see? I'm scared to death. I may die all alone in prison without any of my loved ones around me to comfort me and send me off. I don't want the last faces I see to be those of the two cruel prison guards assigned to watch over me while I slip away. It's almost as if the coronavirus were specifically designed to kill off those locked away from society. I know this isn't literally the case, but this is a virus that is airborne and most affects people in confined, crowded spaces. There is no place for us to hide. We have no home to sequester ourselves in. It's physically impossible for us to separate. The way I'm seeing it right now, this will go on until those of us in prison are all dead, or at the very least until half of us have perished, leaving the other half to occupy the now open single-man cells. Now, for me, reading this, hearing this again, is quite sobering and challenges me to think about the way I use my own language, the language of incarceration, imprisonment, going stir crazy. But because this language of imprisonment has become such a trend, it made me start thinking about my own interest in theological hospitality. If you know my work, then you know that it tries to draw theological implications from Matthew 25, the parable of the sheep and the goats, where Jesus says, I was a stranger, I was naked, I was in prison, he says, and you visited me. Specifically, I want to know how to think theologically about time and hospitality. How do prisoners think about time? Now, given the vagaries of prison life, the interplay between faith, hope, and time is more heightened for prisoners than for ordinary folk. In fact, time is, next to the concept of space, the critical element in understanding the metaphysics of prison life. Contemporary prisoners have developed their own language for this. They speak of, quote, doing time, serving time, passing time, hard time. And then there is Buck Rogers time, a parole date so far into the century that a prisoner cannot imagine release. In the New Testament, Christian prisoners fended off this despair by making use, I believe, of three perspectives of time: the chronological, the ritualistic, and the imperatival. Paul's request that Timothy come before winter indicates an awareness of chronological time. The seasons are going by, come before winter, come before the storms start to happen again. Paul adopts a ritualistic metaphor for time when he writes, for I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. Here he's drawing up Old Testament images of offerings and ritual. For those who will remain alive after him, he encourages them to live with a sense of urgency. This is the imperatival use of time. He urges them to live in the kairos, to live in the propitious moment, so that according to Colossians, they may make the most of the time. You might pause today to think about how you live out these three types of time. What does the chronology of your day look like? What are your private rituals? Is it getting coffee in the morning? What are your public rituals? What do you do with others? What is kairotic for you? What is it that has to be done, that must be done today, that no other time will afford? What is it that by taking charge of the time, you can change yourself or the world? The second way to rethink our language is also prompted by this passage. I was in prison and you visited me. It is to remember that visiting a prisoner is usually a welcome interruption into their time. The boredom and tedium of prison life is well documented. What is less known is how rarely prisoners are visited. A 2014 study published in the journal Crime and Delinquency finds that Florida inmates, on average, receive only 2 visits from friends or family during the entire length of their stay behind bars. 2 visits. As for the ancient world, visiting a prisoner was difficult and life-threatening. All visitors had to navigate often horrid conditions, the problem of abuse and rape, of not being able to leave when one wanted, of being confused for being a prisoner. Craig Wansink, in his book Chained in Christ, makes the following observations. In the ancient world, one's ability to visit a loved one, he says, or friend, could turn on the opportunity to bribe the judge or the jailer or others, and was a significant factor in how everyone was treated, both the visitor and the prisoner. In Pliny, we hear of a plebeian woman who has just given birth, who visited her mother in prison. She was searched by the doorkeeper to prevent her taking food to her mother, but she was detected giving her mother sustenance from her own breast. This woman breastfed her own mother in prison. It would be the most striking thing that Wansink points out is a quotation from Chrysostom. And Chrysostom says this: if one wanted to study horrible or unique diseases, Chrysostom says, one should visit prison. It would be difficult at this time to visit prisoners. However, it is not difficult to visit them through the mail. There are any number of websites that will allow you to connect with prisoners and become pen pals with them. You might want to investigate how letter writing could be life-giving for yourself and an act of hospitality. However, what all of us can do is to visit with those right next to us. Yesterday, I got 2 phone calls from friends that I had not spoken with for a while. We had great conversations and reconnected, discovering new ways, new things that we had in common. One of the calls, the second call, was from my friend Timothy Cannon, and he issued me this challenge. He said, make a list of the people you have not spoken with in 2 years, and then decide to call them. In this time, when our language is changing, when we're talking about sheltering in place, when we're talking about quarantine or being in prison, I want to introduce you to another word, a big fancy word, but a word that I think has theological overtones. The word is propinquity. Propinquity is one of the main factors in interpersonal attraction. It refers to the physical or psychological proximity between people. Propinquity means a kinship or similarity in the nature of things. So 2 people who live on the same floor of a building have a propinquity that they don't have with others. I don't want us to think about social distancing anymore. I want us to think about social closeness. I want us to think about how the message of God, how the gospel of Jesus encourages theological propinquity, being together and being around each other and for each other and sharing in all the ways that we can acts of hospitality, whether it's visiting over the fence or by the phone or through the mail. This should be a time when we should not be dwelling on our own self-pity, but how can we be sources of refreshment and life renewal for others? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sutherland. Rabbi Cardin, we're going to unmute you as well. And we want to join into some conversation. I always tell people one good reason to study theology is to learn a new word, right? And here we are in such a moment. Rabbi Cardin, do you want to jump in? Do you have a comment or a question? I know normally you and Arthur have co-taught, you and I have co-taught, and it's always great to hear what you have to say right after we've said something.
Well, in Arthur, that was fabulous. And I had a preview of this. Arthur and I spoke a couple days ago, as you know, and I had several thoughts. But even hearing him now, I have sort of a new thought that I'd like to just share to kick this off. And if my other points are brought forward later in the conversation, that's great too. If not, I've just been so inspired by Arthur helping me understand hospitality through the lens of time. Because in our class, we kept, there was a little tug of war, whether or not hospitality depended on place, or whether hospitality could be an expression of spirit as well. And as Arthur would probably be the second person to tell you, and I would be the first one to tell you that I was a stark, ardent proponent of hospitality being of place. That place and location was a critical component of it. But I, in hearing this compelling hospitality through the lens of time, I want to share this one thing where in Judaism, place and time are collapsed. And so there's an expansive understanding of hospitality. And it's an arcane tradition. It's an arcane mitzvah. But it just happened on Passover, so I will share it with you. So you have to understand a little bit about the rules of Sabbath. And then the holidays. One cannot cook on the Sabbath. One does not use fire on the Sabbath, so therefore one cannot cook on the Sabbath. But when it's a year like this year, when Passover starts Wednesday night, it is very hard when you have a family to cook for Wednesday night, Thursday, Thursday night, Friday, Friday night, Saturday, before the holiday. On the holiday, you're allowed to cook, but you're only allowed to cook for the holiday. You can only do on the holiday what is essential for the holiday. So if you can't cook for 3 days before the holiday, and you can't cook for the Sabbath on the holiday, then when you get to the Sabbath, you're eating grape nuts and milk, for dinner. So what do? So the rabbis say, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a legal fiction. Rabbis are great at legal fictions. What you need to do before the holiday is to set aside a symbolic meal, piece of bread, or in this case, matzah, because it was Passover, piece of matzah, and some cooked dish. And you set that aside and you say a particular blessing, and that serves as your Sabbath meals. It could be, I could hold the symbolic meal in two hands, put it in my refrigerator, say this blessing, and then I can cook all I want on the holiday for Sabbath, because what I'm doing is cooking on the holiday for the holiday, and I already have my Sabbath meal. And if anything's left over for what I'm cooking now, I can also eat that on the Sabbath, right? You're all following me? I hope so. Okay. So why am I telling you all this? Because the blessing that you say when you set aside this symbolic meal is the following. Blessed are you, Lord of the universe, who has commanded us according to this Eruv Tavshilin, this mixture of foods, which allows me to cook from Yontif, from the holiday to the Sabbath, and then it ends me and anyone living in this community, anyone in my neighborhood. So my kitchen, and what I'm doing at this moment, and Arthur, it's very time bound, right? It has to be right before the holiday. What this time-bound commandment that I'm fulfilling in my kitchen stretches out and embraces everyone in my community. And if there's anyone who forgets, because by the way, it's easy to forget this. You don't do this before every holiday. You only do it when the holiday starts on a Wednesday night. If you forget this, you in your own kitchen can say, I am hosted by someone else in their kitchen. And because they have set aside this food, I can now cook on the holiday for the Sabbath. And I will tell you, once in my life, I forgot this mitzvah. And I will tell you, I said, who in my community can I be a guest of? Who in my community has done this to allow me, from what she did in her kitchen, to allow me to cook in my kitchen? And I said, I know, it's Barbara. I remember her name to this very day. I said, Barbara, I know, has not forgotten. And so because Barbara did that, because of the hospitality of Barbara in her place, reaching into my kitchen and my place, I could feed my family when I needed to. So there is that's sort of an expansion of place and time through ritual, which allowed me to be guest and therefore allowed me to be host in my kitchen, my family.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I was just going to invite people to begin typing questions into the chat as you go ahead and respond. Didn't mean to interrupt you. Sorry.
No, so that's an interesting way in which place and time are brought together, right? And I think it's open, right? It creates a space to be welcoming to others, right?
Right, and in the very blessing, we speak of others,
Mm-hmm.
welcome, being embraced in our home, right, in our kitchen. It is the food and the kitchen and the ritual that embraces all of us, kitchen to kitchen to kitchen, all around the community.
Yeah.
So in a sense, the ritual helps to create propinquity.
Yes.
Would you say?
Absolutely. I mean, she was present to me, even though I wasn't present to her because she didn't know I forgot. But in the blessing, we are all present to each other. We are in each other's sacred presence at that moment. Absolutely.
So Arthur, it feels to me like you've suggested that we may recover certain practices or initiate new ones to also help to create propinquity at this time. Is that one of the things I'm hearing?
So yesterday when I got these two phone calls, I got the first phone call. I was out in the backyard working on my garden, and my neighbor has gone to West Virginia. He's sheltering in place at his cabin up there. Mm-hmm. So I just happened to wander over to his part of the yard because there was a wall and I could sit and have this conversation with my friend, right, who I hadn't talked to in a long time. But just the very act of being at another part of that space created an opening for me to have conversations with my friend, you know. So it wasn't the words would have been the same place anywhere, right? But because I was in a new place, the words meant something more, something different.
Nice.
And there's a question Mark asked about, through practices of Christian prayer, is there a way to sort of establish hospitality, feel hospitality? And one of the things that strikes me about Christian prayer and Jewish prayer is that many times that I experience Christian prayer, they are spontaneous outpourings of words of beauty and meaning and moment. And I'm often jealous because when people say, "Would you be able to bless this food?" I always have to say, "Yeah," but it's like a short Hebrew blessing that we say all the time. I mean, we have matbea, we have precise words that we have to say, and I often think of that as sort of a deficit when it compared to the spontaneous outpourings of Christian prayer. But in light of Mark's question, I actually see that now as a tremendous unifying component of prayer. So for example, right now we're in a period called the Omer. We count from the second day of Passover, 49 weeks, to the holiday of Shavuos, the week of weeks. I'm not quite sure what it's called in English. We have 49 weeks from Passover to the next holiday. And literally we count every day. We count every day at nightfall in our evening prayers. And and it's the same count. We're on day 13 now. I can say it out loud because I counted it last night. You're not allowed to say the number until you make the blessing, then you say the number. We're in the 13th day. And I know that all around the world, Jews everywhere are praying not just the same prayers, but they're praying that same line of blessing and that same number. And there's a unifying component. We're all in this together. I mean, I think that's one of the things I imagine Christian prayer. I'd love to hear. I imagine Christian Christian prayer does the same thing. But when Jewish women on Friday night light the Shabbos candles, the 2 Sabbath candles, and they cover their eyes and they say the blessing, one of the things that we're all taught is that around the world, Jewish women are doing the same thing. And again, we're connected home to home, kitchen to kitchen. So our prayers, precisely because they are formulaic and we know that others are saying it at the same time, in the same way, in precise language, unifies us. So actually, something very powerful about that.
I think that's part of why Pope Francis invited Christians to use the Lord's Prayer, which is perhaps the most widely shared across Christian division, and invited folks even to try to do it at the same time. So go ahead, Arthur.
Yeah, so thank you. I wanted to just go back a little bit, because I identified three ways of looking at it, three ways of looking at time. I said the chronological, the ritualistic, and the imperatival, the kairotic. And I was thinking about the ways in which we hear this all the time, but we're not aware of it. So what's the commercial for Folgers coffee? I'm not going to sing it. The best part of waking up is what?
Folgers in your cup.
Folgers in your cup. Right. Really?
Right.
You know, is today going to be that's going to be now I drink coffee, you know, I love coffee, and I'm not going to give that up, coronavirus or not. But I don't want the best part of my day to be chronological, start my day off with a cup of coffee. That's my ritual, and say I have now entered into a kairotic moment. No, the best part of waking up ought to be the love that I share with the people closest to me, the love that I share with the people farthest away from me. That's what it means to make use of time that I'm talking about here.
Just ironically, on my Zoom screen and the tiles, the people closest to you, your wife and 2 children, have been arranged directly underneath you on my screen. So they are literally the closest.
They're literally there, yeah.
And I'm on one side of you, and Rabbi Cardin's on another side of you. But it is interesting to think about the ways in which technology is trying to help us overcome certain barriers to closeness, and it does it in some ways and not in others. But your conversation and the conversation between the two of you has reminded us that the prayer itself is a practice that is seeking to also overcome distances of space and time. Audrey Smith, our alum council chair, has written, "Can we not through prayer welcome all the beauty and suffering of the world and thereby turn social distancing into social spaciousness?" I like that idea of prayer as a kind of welcoming of spaciousness. And maybe partly because we're being welcomed into the spaciousness that is God.
And somehow that term, I use the term social closeness, but I like social spaciousness. That's expansive, isn't it?
It is. But maybe that imperatival is part of what tells us, commands us, invites us to approach it with the right attitude. Attitude matters. Dr. Brian Volk, who will be actually one of our co-presenters in 2 weeks, has noted that the Benedictine monastic tradition strongly connects stability over time in a particular place and hospitality to strangers. You all, Benedictines probably came up when you all co-taught, I feel sure. Where else might we find this link embodied or institutionalized?
So that's interesting, because one of the things the Benedictines were trying to position them over against was a term called the gyrovagues, who people, monks, well, not monks, hermits who just moved around from space to space. And they said, no, if we're going to have a spiritual life, we need to be in a particular place, right? So how do you find that to today? Well, I mean, right now in your home, you can make your home a monastery if you want to, right?
Yeah.
You can, if you think about the ways in which institutions around us are being destabilized, what can be kept stable, right? I mean, all the educational institutions we've never faced this before. I mean, I'm sure you feel it more than I do, right? But if this goes on for another 18 months, right? What's going to happen? So looking for places that we can make stable, right? I think it's going to be very important to us.
It occurred to, go ahead, Rabbi Cardin.
Go ahead, it's okay.
Yeah. Well, just to tag on to the whole theme of monasticism, though just as the wonderful essay from the prisoner that perhaps you can give us the link and we can share that more widely on our website, reminds us that what we're currently experiencing is not incarceration, and we should be careful with language. I was thinking yesterday about how there's a certain monastic quality to what some of us are experiencing, but we haven't literally become monks or nuns. That said, the monastic tradition deals with certain virtues and vices, and it does feel to me like some of the vices that monastics had to learn to recognize and resist are important to consider. For example, I just lost it. Acedia, the vice of a kind of deep unease of soul that can develop over time, and you're not even sure where it's coming from. But it sort of drains you of a sense of the purposeness, the goodness, the joy of life. We may want to think some more about that down the road. Just to riff on the monastic theme. Rabbi Cardin, you've been invited to comment on a tractate, but you may have been about to say something different.
Yeah, I'm sort of racking my brain to see if there's something in Pirkei Avot which is the Ethics of the Fathers, a 2,000-year-old text of basically ethical teachings. But I don't have something right now, Brian, but I'll try to work on that. But I have another thought, and that is because Jews have not had the historical and spiritual and emotional security of being able to put down roots and to say, this is where I am. You know, once we had the exile, once we were kicked out 2,000 years ago or so, after the destruction of the Second Temple, and we left the land of Palestine and then populated Europe and Babylonia and the rest of the world. Our security, our physical security, our locational security, of course, was not something that we could enjoy. We nonetheless had to create for ourselves a place of stability. And I believe that the mezuzah, that artifact that we put on our doorposts, that we're commanded to put on our doorposts, probably figuratively from the Bible, but we turned it into literally in the rabbinic mind. We have these mezuzot, these, I think you all know what I'm talking about. If you look at an outer Jewish doorpost, there's like on the right side as you enter, there's on a slight diagonal, it's usually an attractive piece of art. Well, the artwork is just the casing for the real thing, which is a parchment inside, which actually has the words that you should put these words of Torah on your doorposts. Those mezuzot symbolically transform every Jewish home into what I consider an embassy of sacredness, an embassy of our homeland. And so once we put that mezuzah on our door, we establish some sort of spiritual security and stability. So it says to us, we are now home. It doesn't really make a difference what the geographic dimensions are. We are part of that large sacred Jewish place of homeland. And each and every Jewish home is, again, symbolically and spiritually, another embassy of stability and home. So we can go. So I guess I would be saying, if someone saw the mezuzah on my door and wanted to knock on the door and ask for entry so that they could also feel like they are part of the Jewish community. In a time of COVID, obviously I can't invite them in, nor would they be knocking. But in other times, I'm sure that would be something that they could feel. And I remember, I don't know how many of you live in apartment buildings, or especially if you've lived in like Manhattan in apartment buildings or Brooklyn, where there are lots of Jews, and you could go up and down as a kid, kids would like go up and down the halls and sort of count the mezuzot and see, where the Jewish families were. And there was a sense of connectedness just by seeing the mezuzot, saying that there is a secure, stable, sacred. So that's the way I think Jews have responded to that.
I imagine many imaginations are beginning to think about of those Christians who are part of this conversation, beginning to try to think about some analogs of how our own homes and in and through what practices or artifacts our own homes could become an embassy of stability, of security, and indeed of hospitality. It's a lovely image. Dr. Sutherland, do you have is there a piece of this that you really expected us to run with that we've run away from instead?
I wouldn't say run away from, no, I wouldn't say that. But I guess just to return to my larger point is to just think about the language that we're using.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what a privilege it is, to have a home to be sheltered in.
Amen.
Right?
Yeah.
That is, why should we be bemoaning? Of course, everyone wants to get back to normal. Of course I do. Right?
I found in your presentation a couple of things. One, a calling to remember those that lack those resources, and to consider ways to take up practices to connect, to not just acknowledge or remember, but to engage. And so you invited us to consider writing letters. I would say implicitly you also invited us to consider that when we recall a person that we haven't been in contact with in a while, that may be a prompting, even a spiritual prompting,
Absolutely.
to communicate, to reach out, to reconnect in some way. My imagination is running rampant, but I'm cognizant that it's my responsibility to keep time. We're at the point where we want to offer up prayers. Rabbi Cardin, a last comment.
Just one last comment, because it's true, we are all blessed with having a home, to call our own. I just want to acknowledge that there are some who are indeed imprisoned in their own homes because they are victims of domestic violence.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Been very concerned about that.
Yeah.
Right. It is if there are ways that we can continue to reach out to all sorts of people whom we know, because we don't know who actually is a victim necessarily, and continue to reach out and talk. So that's a critical element.
I thank you for mentioning that, because that's the other side of this, right? Which, and those stories are not being told yet, but that they will be told.
I invite people to type in initials for intercessory prayer now. It's a kind of practice that we've taken on to intercede, and we're going to remember those who are suffering this confinement as an intensification of suffering, and we'll remember those suffering domestic violence and other forms of deprivation. So I invite us, as we close in prayer, just a reminder, we hope to see you next week with Dr. Mark Gorman reflecting on the end. But let us pray. Loving and gracious God, thank you for welcoming us into your mercy and your love. We lift up all of these that we are indicating through the initials, and so many more that we remember in our hearts, or that we should remember, and we ask you to call them to our mind. We intercede for those who are suffering, for those who are ill, for those who are experiencing violence or alienation. Bring your healing into this world. Bring forth goodness, restore hope and health, and make us one loving community. We offer these prayers to you, our God. Amen.
Amen.
thank you all, and anybody who wants to unmute and say God bless you, you're welcome to do that as you sign off. But God bless you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
you.
Dr. Sutherland. Thank you,
Thank you,
Rabbi
Nina.
Cardin.
Thank you for the